My reading is a poem called Astronauts by Robert Hayden. In the mid-1970s, Hayden was serving in the role that we today know as the U.S. Poet Laureate, and he was the first African-American writer to serve in this position. Here begins the reading. Armored in oxygen, faceless in visors, mirror masks reflecting the mineral glare, shadow of moonscape. They walk slow motion, floatingly, the lifeless dust of Taurus Littrow. And wow, they exclaim, oh boy, this is it. They sing exalting, though trained to be wary of emotion and philosophy, breaking the calcined stillness of once absolute everywhere. Risking edges, earthlings to whom only their machines are friendly, and God's radar-watching eye, they labor at gathering proof of hypothesis. In snowshine of sunlight, dangerous as radium, probe detritus for clues. What is it we wish them to find for us as we watch them on our screens? They loom there, heroic antiheroes, smaller than myth, poignantly human. Why are we troubled? What do we ask of these men? What do we ask of ourselves? Here ends the reading. When we were kids in the 1970s, my brother and I were in awe of the astronauts. We were in awe of the astronauts Robert Hayden wrote about so eloquently in the poem I just shared. One of my very earliest memories of watching television together as a family is watching these Apollo astronauts. We sat down together back in December of 1972, staring at our humble little 18-inch black and white television screen, watching the Apollo 17 moon landing. This was the last of the moon landings, actually. My brother and I were admiring the astronauts, oohing and aahing at their every move, when my father, the ever-cerebral Unitarian Universalist, reminded us gently that the real heroes of the space program were the geniuses at NASA who did the calculations and created the machines that made the moon landings possible. Being an astronaut, he reminded us, required far less know-how, far less brain power. Young though I was, what my father said made a certain amount of sense. But my admiration for the astronauts did not wane. What amazed me about these men, and yes, in those days they were all men, was the courage that it takes to get into a spaceship of some kind, largely losing control over your fate, and entering the great unknown, entering the once absolute everywhere, as Hayden puts it in his poem. The astronauts were almost unfathomably brave in my book. There's a quotation you'll hear from time to time, usually in ecological circles. The quotation is of Russell or Rusty Schweickart, who was an Apollo 9 astronaut. And I'll share a brief excerpt of his words, his musings on seeing the Earth from space. He said, "When you go around the Earth, you begin to recognize that your identity is with that whole thing. You realize that on that small spot, that little blue and white thing is everything that means anything to you. All of history and music and poetry and art and birth and love and tears, joy, games. All of it is on that little spot out there that you can cover up with your thumb." And certainly Schweikert's words serve well to remind us of the preciousness of earth and the fragility of earth. But these words also came back to me when I was thinking about what it is to die. I'll explain. When we face the death of a loved one, it's incredibly hard to face life without that precious one here with us. We're profoundly sad because we won't see that loved one again in this lifetime. Today's candles of love and memory were a chance to acknowledge the great life that was lost to us. And it's an enormous loss, one of life's hardest times, losing someone you love. But astronaut Schweikert's words remind me of the perspective of the one who is dying, the one who died. The loved one who died left behind everything they ever knew and loved. Think of it, in all of human history, only about 500 brave souls have ever been launched into space. Yet all of us, each and every last one of us, will die. About 100 billion humans have died before us, according to estimates. And the 7.7 billion of us alive and here today will also experience this. We too will leave behind everything that means anything to us. Truly, it's a hero's journey. How strange that we rarely talk about it, especially when death is the only thing we can know with absolute certainty about our future. For me, Hayden's poem is, at least in part, about the astronauts as every man or every woman or every person. He describes what they wear, noting that it makes them faceless. And notice that he even calls their face coverings mirror masks, just one word rather than masks. The mirror masks reflect us back to ourselves. Even though in their suits of armor the astronauts seem like superheroes, their armor is really, as he says, of oxygen. It merely allows them to breathe, to survive. Hayden calls them smaller than myth, poignantly human. Perhaps that's why we're troubled looking at them. They and we are so vulnerable, our existence so fragile, no matter what heights we might achieve in this lifetime. We're all bound for Hayden's once absolute everywhere. Impermanence seems to be at the core of life on this planet and the universe as far as we know. Nothing that is material can last in its current form forever. But to quote from another favorite poet, Audre Lorde, we were never meant to survive. Our lives are works of art, but our lives are more like statues made of ice or sand, rather than statues made in marble and bronze. Today, with our candles of love and memory, we honor those that we lost in the very best way through the simple and reverent act of saying their names and later telling their stories. We remember these loved. They are with us as long as we live, and they live on in memory, even as others will eventually be remembering us. Today, the losses we share are fresh. It can be hard early in the grieving process to see the beauty of the life cycle, even in its ending. And we hold you in our love and in community this morning. I think of the words of UU Minister Edward Searle, words I sometimes share in a memorial service. A human life is sacred. It is sacred in its being born. It is sacred in its living. And it is sacred in its dying. We hold those of you experiencing a fresh loss in prayer. We hold you in our loving thoughts and wishes for healing. Yes, death comes to it all, but that doesn't make it any less devastating for loved ones left behind. And we hope that you will lean on us We are here for you. This morning, we also shared candles of hope and joy, remembering the dear babies who were born in this past year. Babies in our own circle of immediate caring, babies of family and friends. In the past year, approximately 136 million babies were born. The babies who are especially near and dear to us, the ones we named this morning, represent them all. This is the part of the cycle of life that is more pleasant to ponder, the part that brings us hope and joy, as we named it today. What will these babies do with their one wild and precious life, as poet Mary Oliver puts it? The possibilities are endless. That's part of the magic of this part of the life cycle. Virtually no possibilities have been closed to the newborn child. Maybe the child will be a poet, whether published or not. Maybe the child will be an amazing parent one day. Maybe the child will find their way in life with relative ease. Maybe life will be complicated, but still beautiful and incredible in a way less obvious to the outside eye. We don't know. What we do know is that their life, like all life, is sacred. Sacred in being born, sacred in its living. And we know that their life will be a journey. We know that the baby, in living its life, will really be an astronaut, though the odds are not an astronaut for NASA. Every once in a while, you hear a line in a movie or a TV show that really stays with you. One of those lines for me was in the TV series Mad Men. There's a character named Ida Blankenship. She's an older woman and someone that in the era depicted might have been called a tough old bird. She was briefly appointed as the secretary for the caddish main character, Don Draper. She was assigned to him to keep him away from temptation and trouble. One day, she dies suddenly and unexpectedly, though peacefully, while at her desk, right in front of her typewriter. The boss of the office, Bert Cooper, memorializes her with words that have stayed with me. He said of Ida, "She was born in 1898 in a barn. She died on the 37th floor of a skyscraper. She was an astronaut." She was an astronaut, indeed. We are all astronauts in this lifetime, and so too are the children whose lives we have begun this year. May their journey on spaceship Earth be filled with love and blessings. In closing, I share the words we shared responsively earlier, words of David Eaton. Birth, life, death. Unknown, known, unknown. Our destiny from unknown to unknown. May we have the faith to accept this mystery and build upon its everlasting truth. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.